banking systems is toast. What do I do? So clearly that's a massive question. So maybe it's really about learning to take responsibility for ourselves. That's quite a journey though. So where do we start with that?
Well, really, you brought it up earlier, Andrew, and you could not have been more spot on, because when one system dies, another one is born. So what you need is a bridge to get you from one system to the next. And that's partly what gold and silver provide, because they hold your purchasing power intact and they enable you to sustain a reasonable standard of living. But mostly as far as being that independent, because really 2008, I knew the system died. And that's when I became a prepper. And I've been working on it diligently since then to become as independent and self-sufficient as possible. We don't have that luxury of time anymore. We really don't. And that's where local community comes in, because in a community, everybody brings the gifts that they have been given, their knowledge, their skill sets, their assets. And we help each other get through this in this way, because it really does take a village, no matter what it is that we're doing. And we need to do this. And we also need to come together in global fashion, which is what you and I do so well, I think, because we need to get, in my strong opinion, we need to get redeemable gold back in the system again. As crazy as that may sound, it was there. It was once there. But in that way, if we do not do this, then you're going to lose all of your freedom. And if you don't have wealth that's outside of the system, and the system says no, what do? You're going to have to do whatever they tell you to do. But if you come together and you create surety through that local community on food, water, security, barterability, wealth preservation, energy, and shelter, well, now, if they say jump, you get the luxury of saying, nope, not going to do it. Now, some of it you're going to have to acquiesce, because if that ends up being the new system, then it does. But I'm saying, nope. Okay, we're going digital. I know that that's happening. I have never had any false pretenses about that. But we can still do redeemable gold. I mean, Kinesis does redeemable gold, right? That's why it fits into the first part of the strategy, which is the ability to sustain your standard of living, because you need that liquidity. So in the sound money strategy that we execute here at Zang International, that very first part is about making sure that you can sustain a reasonable standard of living. And that means that it's got to include some of this cash. Yep, I know it's losing all of its value, but that's what's most recognized. Some of the digital gold, like Kinesis, and I'm good with Kinesis because it is redeemable. I wouldn't even touch a credit card that says they're backed by gold. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I don't know. But if I can take it out, if I have that right and that option, I feel comfortable with that. And that enables you to transact, not local, because when we go through hyperinflation, everything gets really local. So that's a nice level of liquidity, maybe even in the cash portion, some of the gold backs, which contain a fraction of gold in there. And this would be for local. But then you go into your barterable. So barterable gold, which is fractional, different sizes, and the same thing with silver. So depending upon what it is that you need to accomplish, if it's, for example, buying strawberries or gas, well, you want to do that with silver. You're not doing that with gold. If you want to pay your property taxes, or I hope nobody does, but obviously if you have a chronic illness, that's what you need the barterable gold for. And you could also, again, use the credit card. It just depends on how your lifestyle is set up. And that's what we look at. We look at your goals. We look at your circumstances. We look at what you have to work with. And we create a strategy with that very first part, sustaining your standard of living, in mind. Then we look at what fiat money, intangible assets that you've managed to accumulate. And we make sure that you are properly diversified with tangible assets. What a concept. So if this goes away, this rises up, you're okay. You are properly diversified. We also like to take a look at your fixed rate debt, like mortgages and things like that, because the government's strategy is to repay that debt within the US, but this is true anywhere in the world, with their fiat money that they create that has absolutely, or it's losing value until it has no value. We can utilize that strategy too, because once we enter that hyperinflation, people are very panicked. They will come in and they will do an overnight reset to get rid of that debt and pay it off with, in the US, dollars that have zero value. You do the same thing with your mortgage. So we calculate all of that out. And then finally, we want to put you in a position to accumulate those assets that can generate lifetime income that, oh my goodness, you can't outlive. You know, when I first became a stockbroker in the 80s, nobody ever talked about outliving your assets, because at that point, gosh, if you had $1 million, you were very wealthy and you'd stick that in treasuries. So, you know, and then you'd get like a 10% yield on that. And back in the 80s, if your income was $100,000 a year, you were quite wealthy. Today, you can't pull together $400 for an emergency, and you need more than that for your standard of living. But we want to make sure that on the other side of this, not only are you made whole, it's created in a full circle, but you're actually in a better place than when you began. So all that barterable that we were talking about in the beginning, well, that's your principal. And yep, you're using that up. So we want to make sure that we recoup that. So it's really comprehensive strategy. I've been studying currency life cycle since 1987. I worked on this strategy for a gazillion years. And then of course I have other brilliant minds that come in. So that's the way we work here. And it is about sustaining your standard of living, putting you in a better debt position, and then taking advantage of the opportunities that arise, because they always do. There's always opportunity in crisis if you're in the right place with the right asset at the right time.
You do a lot of work with Citizens of Sound Money, and Daniel Diaz, we just did an episode with him last week on updating what we're doing in Kinesis. Essentially, this is you hold regular sessions with that. Isn't it once a month that people can come and parachute in? Now, is Daniel involved in those calls?
Oh, 100%, because quite honestly, I do not personally, I'm not a political beast. Although Kim has a great saying, and that is, you may not be interested in politics, but politics is very interested in you. And so I mean, how true is that, right? So I really realize that if we want to get sound money back in the system, yeah, we need to do it on a grassroots level, but who knows, or who is really comfortable, if you've had no experience with that, on where to even start to get politically involved at a state and local level, because that's the level where you can have real conversation. That's the level where you can start to educate these politicians that really are making choices on your behalf, and they don't understand sound money. Most people don't understand sound money. I have a really simple definition. It's money that is above all governments and central bankers' ability to inflate away, because it's physical gold and silver. These are the two assets that, number one, gold runs zero counterparty risk. But number two, you got 33 different global users of physical gold and 36 different users of physical silver. And this is global. So it overwhelms the government's and central banks' ability to control it. They can control the spot markets. That's easy peasy. But the physical markets, they just really can't. And I'm kind of a little off topic here, but I'm super excited because I've been witnessing this shift since a year ago in January out of the paper markets dictating price action to the physical true supply and demand markets dictating price action. And it's not just in gold and silver, but, I think that the Wall Street magic wand of just creating money and pushing it into the system, I think that's coming to an end because it's all built on the back of the 99% of us. It's the 1% and the 99%. And in this K-shaped recovery, which is extraordinarily obvious here in the US, the consumer with the inflation, I mean, we recently, this has me quite nervous, really. Yes and no, nervous. But recently we saw consumer sentiment drop to the lowest level ever. That breaks a support. And once